Hi, I'm Willie Chambers, Blackhawk Superintendent. First thing, I want to take a minute to tell you a little bit about the Blackhawk Community Pride Group. Put out these FAQ sheets that they have in a booklet form. If you want one, you can request one from one of those members or contact the school and we can reach out to one of them and have them get to you. They answer frequently asked questions. And just to note that these were produced by them and paid for by donations to them directly. The school district did not pay a dime for them. And then also, if anybody wants a copy of this presentation, I have copies available. And any time throughout this presentation, the audience, which is rather small at the time, can ask questions throughout. Tonight we're going to talk about the April 7th, 2026 $800,000 recurring operational referendum. I will explain what recurring means in a few slides here, but again, if there's any questions throughout the time, please ask. So why an increase in operating referendums? Well, first of all, the district's revenue limit authority, in other words, how much money you get per child to spend, is the maximum amount of revenue that may be raised through the state general aid and property tax. It's dependent on a couple things. The district membership, and we'll talk about what that actually is in a minute too, times the per pupil dollars. Those per pupil dollars were set based on the spending of the school district in 1993 when the revenue limit worksheets were first implemented. They were first implemented by Governor Tommy Thompson. They were meant to have a 3-year sunset, meaning after 3 years they were supposed to go away. Obviously, they have not. Also, at that time, a key point to note is part of that revenue limit worksheet was that it would be indexed to inflation each year, which we will talk about in a little bit as well. But in 2009-10, that indexing was removed from the revenue limit worksheet, which is creating a lot of the problem that we have today. Okay, so the district membership times the per pupil dollars, and then if you have any recurring or non-recurring referendum, those would be the exemptions, which would give you the revenue limit authority, which again is funded by the state general aid and your property taxes. That typically makes up 75 to 90% of the typical school district's revenue. The other percentage is made up by per pupil aid and different individual aids like transportation aid. It's also made up from federal funding like IDEA for special needs, Title I, Title II, Title III, and Title IV. And that will become apparent that those things are important here in a little bit as well. So, district membership. What is district membership? And you'll see down here at the bottom, FTE does not equal head count. So right now, Blackhawk is at 367 students FTE on the revenue limit worksheet, which is made up of, yes, the head count, which is the butts and seats, are about 330 students right now. It's also made up in open enrollment out versus open enrollment in, which we are over 30 negative, if you will, 30 more out than 30 than in. And then it's also made up by summer school count. So they provide funding to summer school by counting the number of students times the number of minutes. It's a formula that they use, and then multiply that by certain percentages, and that adds about 6 students per year for Blackhawk into this FTE. So it goes from 330 actual butts and seats to 367 for the FTE. So districts in 1993 were spending at different levels. At that time, they went to the annual meeting. The district decided how much money they needed to operate at that time, and it was approved at that annual meeting. Since then, that's why they put the revenue limit worksheets in to kind of regulate that. And if you were spending a lot of money in 1993 for various reasons, your revenue limit was higher at that time. If you were frugal and didn't have a lot of outside of the normal expenses, your revenue limit was set lower. So it's fairly obvious as you look at this that Blackhawk was pretty frugal at that time. And I think has maintained that throughout the years because of board considerations and budgeting and so forth. So if you'll look at this, what we're showing here is revenue limits across the state. The lowest revenue limit right now in the state is $11,037. A lot of them are around $11,650 to $11,707 that we're at. But quite honestly, the average revenue limit per child in the state is $12,492, which is significantly more than what we get per child, with the top revenue limit per child for a district being $33,290. There's a big discrepancy, and hence why some schools are not going to referendum, but a lot of us that are down in here, 80% or so of the school districts have or are going to referendum, operational referendum, to exist. Okay, why is it not working? So as I mentioned before, the revenue limit was decoupled from inflation in 2010. Blackhawk would have received approximately $3,573 more per student this year, with roughly 367 students. That equates to about $1.3 million more that we would have had to spend on opportunities for students if it would have remained indexed to inflation since that time. And also remember in there in 2011 was Act 10, which brought down the revenue limit $572 roughly per child. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's $1.3 million more that we would have asked. The board has been diligent about taking care of your tax dollars, and they're just at the point where they're asking for $800,000. That's still $500,000 lower than what we would have had available if inflation would have been taken into effect over this whole time. So what is a recurring referendum? A recurring referendum is when a community votes to allow a school district to collect extra money every year, not just one time. The additional funding becomes part of the district's ongoing budget and becomes part of the revenue limit. In our case, it is for $800,000. So if you as the voters approve the referendum, we will get $800,000 more to put on top of roughly the $4 million that we have in the revenue limit now. So what that means is, a year from now, we will be able to spend up to $4.8 million. Now, that being said, the following year, just to make it clear, you do not get an additional $800,000. It remains at about that $4.8 million. Give or take changes due to revenue limit increases provided by the state and or student count. It might go down, it might go up a little bit, but it'll be roughly that $4.8 million going forward for a few years, right? Well, forever, depending on those other numbers, okay? And I will also mention at this time, if for some reason the state would drastically increase the revenue per member revenue limit, the amount of money we were able to spend per child, the board does not have to levy for this full amount. So if they were, let's say for some reason the state decided to up the revenue per child per $1,000, which would bring us in $367,000 more roughly, the board could choose to only levy for $33,000. Okay. My mouse isn't working. Why is there a need? Well, quite frankly, there's a need to maintain offering current programs and opportunities student receives. They're not asking for this money, the board's not asking for this money to add additional opportunities for the students. They're asking just to maintain what we currently offer the students. So for the 17 years, state hasn't kept up with rising costs. As a result, just mentioned this last slide, we're at a gap of more than $1.3 million, and funding that directly supports our students in schools. Sources of funding such as ESSER ended in September of '24, and to that point, when the ESSER funds came in, the state decided not to increase school funding because we had these federal funds available, with the unwritten promise that they would backfill all that money, and they certainly did backfill some of it. But they did not cover the gap in inflation over that three-year period of time that the ESSER money was in effect. Also, in 22-23, for instance, high poverty aid was stopped. That affected the district by $21,255, which was less money that we had to spend on the students. And when you're talking $5-6 million a year, 21,000 doesn't sound like a lot, but it is significant. That offered some kind of opportunities for our students here. Additional reasons why they're needed. Increase in special needs costs, okay? We have certainly had, along with most schools in the state, had increased special needs costs. I can't explain why. There's certainly more kids with some challenges that they have to deal with to function well in their environment. But there's a misnomer by some of our legislators that schools overdiagnose. Just to talk about that for a minute, reimbursement was set to cover 42% of those costs this year. And when you think about that, why would a school district go out and purposely spend $1 to only get 42 cents of it back? That doesn't make common sense, right? So it's just that fallacy that districts overdiagnose. It's actually a cost detriment to the district if we would. And then just another point here, I've been asked at different times, well, why don't we just cut some of these services to the special needs students? Well, one, it's federal and state law. Two, it's kind of the ethical obligations, well, it's not kind of, it is the ethical obligations of the school to support those children any way we can. And then the third one is, if you cut those, either without services, without either people resigning, retiring, or leaving on their own choice, or without students of high needs leaving the district, meaning that you don't need as much support at the time, what happens is it's called maintenance of effort, and if you don't maintain that effort, you lose your federal funding, including IDEA, Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. For Black Hawk School District, that's just under $400,000 per year right now. We obviously cannot afford to lose $400,000 besides breaking the law and the ethical obligations of the district. So what is the process that the board went through to arrive at this dollar amount? First of all, the board carefully considered ways to keep our schools strong with respect to the community support. They certainly did not want to not serve our kids well, but they also kept in mind during that time that taxpayers are paying the bill. They are taxpayers, so they're paying the same type of bills you are. The board asked Area Public Finance for guidance to help decide what to ask in the referendum for community support. What my perspective on why they asked Baird to come in is Baird is a well-renowned public finance company that serves school districts across the state. They're very well versed. They have statewide data, and they're experts at honing in on these type of numbers. They certainly presented different options to the board. The board looked through those different options, and what they ended up looking at was, after careful review, they chose to cut $150,000 of expenses and asked the community for $800,000 to support our students in schools. And again, that's just to maintain our current programming. So the board decided to come up with this statement, which simply says the Black Hawk School Board is bringing forward an $800,000 recurring referendum to the community to help sustain the daily operations of our school. This support preserves classroom learning and the essential services that provide for the varied needs of our students. The board believes that the district is currently operating at an absolute minimum level of staffing. Further reductions jeopardize the existence of our school. Okay. Quite a lot said in a fairly straightforward statement. So over the years, I've certainly heard, well, you're losing students, why don't you cut staff or reduce staff? And the fact is, the district has reduced staff. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the video, but this goes from 1990 to next year, what we're projected to be for staffing. When we talk about this staffing, it's total number of teachers and all support staff, which includes paraprofessionals, office staff, administration, custodians. Does not include bus drivers, because I just didn't know how to put the bus drivers into full-time equivalencies. But you will see in 1990, we had 79 staff members. In the last 30 years, the highest was in 2000, 2001. We had 85.5. This year, we're at 55.7. Next year, we're going to be at 53.7 staff members. So the staffing has definitely gone down from the high point of a little over, well, actually 31.8 staff members. Another thing that's come up over the years is our teachers are overpaid, which quite honestly, I don't know if teachers, in my humble opinion, are ever overpaid. But that being said, when you look comparatively across the board at districts in this area, Blackhawk is, now this is the highest pay on the salary, is what this, how they're ranked. And then these are the starting salaries for the different districts. But anyway, Blackhawk is the 5th lowest high salary district out of, I believe there's 14 school districts listed here. And these are pretty representative of what I've seen in the state until you get to some of the bigger suburbs that have more affluent communities. Okay? So the reality is Blackhawk is not one of the higher paid school districts as far as teacher salaries. Then continue talking about the staffing cost comparison. Certainly have heard I didn't pay too much, and I'm not necessarily going to change your mind about that, but the market price of a district administrator in black here, what we did was we took the CESA 3 schools, which is all the school districts from Blackhawk to the west, all the way up to Kickapoo, took the administrator's salaries and averaged them out. The average salary of the district administrator in those 31 school districts is $132,059. And then we took all the school districts across the state with the average, with the enrollment of 250 to 450 students, the FTEs, and added all those up and averaged them out. The average, and the reason we chose that range is Blackhawk's right in the middle of that. The average administrator in those districts makes $128,884. My salary this year is $121,854. So those comparisons are higher than mine. Then we did the same for Mr. Mills. Across the CESA 3 average principal was $103,080. Across the school districts of 250 to 450, the average principal was paid $103,060. And Mr. Mills' salary is $100,271. So again, I'm not necessarily going to convince you that either he or I aren't paid too much, but compared to the market comparisons, we certainly aren't paid higher or as well as our colleagues. Okay, so some other things we wanted to talk about again to tell you, to show you that the board has been really working hard to try to consider what the taxpayers are putting out to support the school district. The reductions for this current school year, what has been reduced from instrumental music, the teacher was reduced from 75 to 50%. We reduced the shuttle bus route. We reduced AD salary by 25%. We converted one full-time custodian to 2 part-time positions, which eliminates the benefits. Thank you. So things like insurance and so forth, and state retirement. Reduced a half-time physical education health teacher. The total savings by those maneuvers were $93,640.76 excuse me. Then other things they looked at for savings this current school year, savings or income. The board and administration did not attend the state convention, which saved $7,500 based on expenses from last year. The board waived their salaries, which saved $5,250. We sold the Gratiot property, which generated $33,750. And then the last one, nobody in the district had a raise, so that's custodians, that's paraprofessionals, that's teachers, that's administrators. Based on the CPI of 2.95 at that time, that would have cost the district an additional $82,600. Those total considerations amounted to $129,075. 26-27 planned reductions. Not replacing the retired teacher that happens to be Lisa Flanagan, and then reducing the Spanish teacher's position. The total for those two positions is $199,340.79. Please understand that's not just salaries, that includes retirement, that includes health insurance, dental insurance, Social Security, long-term disability, all of those pieces. They're also considering possibly sharing or reducing administration. I believe those opportunities to share are no longer available. I have not heard otherwise since then. But if that would have happened, the possible savings there, depending on the arrangement they would make, the best I could figure out would save the district another $65,000 to $100,000. So, you know, some people will say, oops, go ahead and make more cuts, cut until you save that $800,000 or whatever you need to save. Well, you know, the conversation was the district needs to maintain a quality education. We don't want to underserve our students. We want them to be go out and be productive young people when they get out in the workforce. Students need options to pursue a career of their choosing. We certainly don't want to eliminate programming that is feeding into the careers that are needed, such as tech ed and agriculture, which is really where our world is, especially in this area. And then we don't want to eliminate opportunities, either curricular or co-curricular, because students will open enroll to other districts. So the example I've used in other presentations, if we eliminated football tomorrow, you would probably have, I can't say they would all go, 15 to 20 kids looking for other opportunities to play football, right? And then that exacerbates a problem with having a shortage of funds, right? And quite frankly, legislators have put the decision-making on local taxpayers. They tout it as local control, so you do have control over it. But the real piece in my mind as a taxpayer is the legislators have not maintained their obligation to provide a free and public education for students in the state. So then the other thing that may pay interest to you is the mill rate comparison for 25-26. Over here to the far left, Pecatonic area is at 9.98, and you'll see they're going down consistently. Right here, second to the right is Blackhawk at 6.07, and then you have Shullsburg at 4.06. Okay, so Blackhawk is fairly low, well, it is low compared to our neighboring school districts, the districts around us. And then to talk about potential mill rates for 26-27, dependent on if referendums pass or not. The ones in black do not have a current referendum on the table, but their numbers, if the situation were exactly the same next year, will stay at the same that they are. And then the ones in red, you will see the lower number here is where we currently are at for those districts, with Blackhawk being right here at the 6.07. If the referendum were to pass when this data was given to us, it was predicted that the mill rate would be 8.71 next year. That has changed, and the reason it has changed is when this data was put out, the equalized aid formula for the whole state, there's a lot of maneuvering variables in that. And all that data wasn't in, so Baird has to protect their reputation, and they're very conservative. So that was a little bit higher than what they predicted in February when Elise Mern from Baird presented it. We'll show you that here in a minute. Okay. But you will see from this at the 8.71, if everybody's were to pass, Blackhawk is kind of in the middle of that distribution. So then the next question we hear, what happens if the referendum fails? And I can't speak for the board, but we certainly had discussions about it. The board will likely consider additional reductions in return to the referendum in fall of 2026. We were certainly going to have to borrow in order to operate. Next year it will still be in the form of short-term borrowing. And school districts don't get monthly payments, even monthly payments in, but they do have fairly even monthly costs out, because our monthly costs out are staffing costs, right? And we as staff members here at Blackhawk get paid twice a month, so those are consistent. But the money coming in comes in when the tax bills come in, when state aid comes in, and when federal monies come in, and those come in different chunks throughout the year. So we get, I think like tomorrow, we're gonna get a really large chunk of around $1 million. But we've had to cover gaps until we get that money. So we have to short-term borrow to have money to pay the bills in between those payments from the state or federal agency. So what's that do to us when we have to borrow? Well, it puts burden on future operating budgets, because when you're borrowing money, you're spending money to pay for that borrow, right? This one isn't really going to affect us unless we have to borrow for a capital improvement or something like that again. But our bond rating is likely going to be affected in a downward manner. And then what are the other options? Well, consolidation or dissolution are not typically the solution. This came right from Elisa's presentation. It's a multi-year process for either one of them. I've certainly heard people say that, well, just let the school close, and we'll talk about a couple things on that. But the first thing is dissolution. It's not where the board just comes to a meeting and says, we're not going to exist next year. There is a process, and what that process is there's a committee formed statewide, appointed by the state superintendent, at this point, Dr. Joe Underly, who looks at all the parameters, talks to the districts around you and how it will affect them, and basically they decide whether you can even dissolve. If they would decide you can dissolve, they decide what territory goes to what school district, what students are assigned to what school district, and what debt burden goes to that school district along with the students and the property that they get. There has not been a successful dissolution in the past 30 years in Wisconsin. And if you're curious about it, Google the Palmyra Eagle. They're the last school that attempted to dissolve. That committee that was formed in their case would not allow it. Fortunately for them, they were able to go to another referendum and pass it, and hopefully are serving their students to the best of their capacity. Honestly, if you consolidate, there's no promise. Very likely you will not decrease the tax burden. You will increase the tax burden. And then that was that last statement there, under dissolution, school boundary board determines the district boundaries to actually decide if you can even dissolve. So that brings me to this statement. Does the property owner still pay school taxes if the school dissolves? So I asked Senator Howard Markline and Representative Todd Novak if they would produce a statement similar to this for me. They got back to me with this, which was included in a dissolution process document. But what this says, and this is what I highlighted, and this is what I was really asking for, the real property is then added to the tax roll for the newly assigned school district, which means that the property owners must still pay school district level property taxes, but to a different school district. So you don't get a walk away from school taxes. If the referendum passes, how will it affect my taxes? According to the BEAR presentation during the February 11th, 2026 referendum committee board meeting, the average property would increase by 2.24. So instead of that new mill rate of 6.71, it would be 6.31. So on a $100,000 property, the average annual impact of $224 or a monthly impact of $1,867. And nobody's pretending like that's not a significant dollar amount, but that's what the referendum, how it would on average would affect the property of that value. $200,000, you double it. $300,000, you triple it. If you actually want to find the dollar amount for a property that on average that was equal to yours, please make sure you take the fair market value and multiply it by 0.00224, and that should give you a really good estimate of how much your taxes will go up. So if you want to find more information, the district website, if you go to the upper right-hand corner, you will see where it says referendum. You can click on that. The documents that I put out there, the documents that the Blackhawk Community Pride Group has put are on there. And if you have any questions, please feel free. Please feel free to contact me. Any one of those members of that Blackhawk Community Pride are very well versed in information as well. I'm sure they support, answer the questions for you. My email address is up there, or you can call my cell phone number at 608-234-1581. Questions from our huge audience?
Not at this time. I can think of. Jason?
Well, I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.